My name is Smith, and for as long as I can remember, fire has called to me, not in a reckless way, but with a deep sense of purpose. Growing up in a small town on the edge of California's wildlands, I watched fire carve paths of destruction, threatening homes and lives. My father was a firefighter before me, and I saw him stand against the infernos with equal parts courage and humility. To him, firefighting wasn't just a job, it was a calling. When I turned 20, I followed in his footsteps, joining the California Department of Forestry and Fire Protection. For 22 years, the fire line became my second home. Every call was a chance to protect, to fight, to give people hope in the face of devastation. I've always believed in God, and I've always felt His presence, whether in the firehouse or on the front lines. Sometimes it was impossible not to. When you walk into a blaze, with the odds stacked against you and somehow make it out alive, you start to recognize the hand of something greater. I swear, there were moments when I could hear Him in the roar of the flames, or see His work in the way things unfolded. But over the past few years, something shifted. The fires got worse, bigger, hotter, more unpredictable. We used to have a fire season. Now it felt like fire season never ended. Entire communities were wiped out in hours, and no matter how hard we fought, we were always one step behind. I started to wonder, why? Was it just bad luck, climate change? Or was there something deeper at play? That question weighed on me, especially in 2025, when the wildfires became unlike anything I'd ever seen. They didn't just destroy forests and homes, they felt personal, like they were alive, hunting down every vulnerable place they could find. Even with decades of experience, I felt helpless, like I was battling an enemy I couldn't see or understand. I prayed more than ever, asking God for strength, for clarity, for answers. But instead of reassurance, I felt something I never had before: doubt. Was I really making a difference? Was this still my calling? Then came January 15th, a day that started like any other but would change everything. I was on call, part of a task force sent to help with one of the largest fires tearing through Southern California. We'd been working non-stop, stealing what little rest we could between shifts. The sky was an eerie smoke-choked orange, and the air carried that sharp metallic taste that never quite fades. Even after all these years, I wasn't used to it. The way the heat burrowed into your bones, the way destruction had a scent. But there was no time to dwell. Lives were at stake. At 7 a.m., we got the call. A small community on the fire's edge had been evacuated, but some people were still unaccounted for. Some too elderly to leave on their own, others refusing to abandon their homes. Our job was to get them out before the fire reached them. I'd done missions like this 100 times before, but something about this one felt different. I couldn't shake the feeling that today would be a turning point. I just didn't know why. When we arrived, the fire was still miles away, but the wind had picked up, a bad sign. Wildfires are deadly enough on their own, but with the wind, they become unstoppable. We split into teams, going door to door. Most houses were empty, but in one we found an elderly woman sitting alone, clutching a photo album to her chest, tears running down her face. "I don't want to leave," she whispered, her voice trembling. "This is all I have left." I knelt beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You can bring the album," I told her gently, "but we need to go. Now." For a moment, I thought she wouldn't move. Then finally, she nodded. I carried her to our truck, where a teammate stayed behind to drive her to the evacuation center. As I turned back toward the neighborhood, something made me stop. The wind had shifted again, harder this time. A chill ran down my spine. I grabbed my radio. "Command, this is Kane," I said. "The wind's picking up. We need to wrap this up fast." "Copy that," came the response. "Be advised, the fire is moving faster than expected. Stay alert." We pushed on, checking the last few homes. Most were empty, until the final house. Inside, we found a young father with his 2 kids frantically stuffing bags with whatever they could carry. The kids were crying, their father frozen with indecision. "I can't leave everything behind," he murmured, his voice breaking. "You have to," I told him, firm but calm. "Things can be replaced. Your lives can't." He hesitated, torn between fear and reality. Then the kids clung to him, their small hands grasping at his shirt, and something shifted in his eyes. He knew. It was time to go. Into the fire. Into the light. He hesitated, but only for a moment. Then, with a heavy sigh, he relented. We helped him and his kids into the truck, securing them just as the fire crested the hill behind. Their house. The flames roared like a freight train, devouring everything in their path. For a split second, it felt like the whole world was on fire. My heart pounded. I turned to my partner. "We need to move. Now." We jumped into the truck, ready to tear out of there. But then, another wind shift. Suddenly the fire was everywhere. It moved faster than I thought possible, cutting off the main road in seconds. Thick smoke swallowed the air, making it impossible to see. The heat was suffocating, pressing in from all sides like a living thing. My radio crackled, but the signal was weak. "Kane, what's your status?" I coughed, struggling to breathe. "We're trapped." Looking for another way out. Every instinct told me to panic, but I forced myself to stay calm. This wasn't how it was going to end. It couldn't be. Under my breath, I whispered, "God, I need you now." We found a narrow dirt path leading away from the flames, but the fire was closing in fast. The truck rattled as embers pelted the windshield, glowing like burning stars. My partner shouted something, but I couldn't hear him over the roar of the fire. And then, everything went dark. At first, I thought it was the end. But what came next changed everything. When I opened my eyes, I didn't know where I was. For a fleeting moment, I wondered if I was dreaming. The world around me wasn't like anything I'd ever seen. There was light, not the harsh glare of hospital fluorescents, not the flickering orange of fire, but a soft, radiant glow that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once. It wasn't just light. It was warmth, a warmth that wrapped around me, settled deep inside me, filling every part of my being. And then I noticed something else. The stillness. A lifetime spent in chaos. The roar of flames, the blaring sirens, the frantic voices of teammates. And now, silence. Not an empty silence, but one so full it felt like it carried meaning. I looked down, expecting to see my hands, my boots, my body worn from years on the fire line. But I wasn't there. At least, not in the way I had always understood myself to be. The body I had relied on for decades, to pull people from danger, to brace against the heat, was gone. And yet, I had never felt more alive, more real. It was as if every physical part of me had been stripped away, leaving only my essence, my soul. And then came the peace, not just around me, but inside me. It filled every corner of what I now realized was me, not the body I had left behind, but something deeper. I felt weightless, free. Every worry, every fear, every ounce of exhaustion that had clung to me like a second skin, gone. In its place was a stillness so profound it brought tears to my eyes, if I had eyes to cry with. For a brief moment I wondered if I was dead. The thought should have terrified me, but it didn't. Instead, it felt like an answer to a question I hadn't even realized I'd been asking my whole life. If this was death, it wasn't something to fear, it was beautiful. I don't know if I was standing, floating, or simply existing, but as I took in this new reality, I noticed something else. The light. It wasn't just light, it was alive. It pulsed gently, as if it had a heartbeat. It shifted and shimmered, taking on colors I had no names for, forming patterns that moved with purpose, and I could feel it, not just around me but inside me, as if it was part of me, as if I was part of it. And then came the presence. I don't have the words to describe it, because words aren't enough. It wasn't a person, not a voice, at least not in the way we understand those things. It was an awareness, a knowing, and it was love. Not the kind of love I had known in life, the kind that's measured, given in pieces, dependent on what you do or how much you achieve. This love was absolute, unconditional. It saw me, every failure, every doubt, every mistake. And it didn't flinch. There was no judgment, no shame, no measuring up, just acceptance. A love so pure, it didn't just tolerate me, it embraced me. And for the first time in my entire existence, I felt whole, as if every broken piece of me had been gathered up, put back together, and made new. I could have stayed there forever. But then, questions began to form. Where was I? What had happened? Was this heaven? If it was, why didn't it look the way I'd always imagined? No pearly gates, no angels with harps, no golden streets. And what was I supposed to do now? I didn't have answers, but somehow I knew. They would come. Because this wasn't an ending, it was just the beginning. And as I stood in that presence, I began to see something else. A glimpse, faint at first, like looking through frosted glass. But the more I focused, the clearer it became. I could see the world I had left behind, and I could see my body slumped over between two worlds. Smoke swirled through the cab of the fire truck as my partner's frantic shouts echoed around me. I could see the paramedics rushing toward us, their faces tight with urgency as they fought to revive me. I should have felt panicked. Watching my own lifeless body from above should have been terrifying, but it wasn't. I felt no fear, no attachment to the form I had just left behind. It was like looking at an old coat I had long outgrown. Then something else caught my attention. The fire that had surrounded us wasn't just flames and smoke. It was alive. On the spiritual plane, it twisted and writhed like a living thing. And it wasn't alone. Something was inside it. Dark shapes lurked within the fire, shadowy, moving with purpose. They weren't human. They weren't animals. But they carried an unmistakable malice. They fed on the destruction, growing stronger as the fire consumed more. I wanted to look away. I couldn't. It was as if I was being shown something I needed to understand. The world I had left behind wasn't just a physical reality. It was layered with something deeper, a spiritual dimension that shaped everything we thought we knew. The fires, the destruction, the chaos. It was all connected. And just as that realization settled over me, I felt it. A presence. It wasn't just near. It was everywhere, growing stronger, more focused. The light around me shifted. I wasn't alone anymore. His presence. Someone was approaching. Though approaching isn't the right word, it was more like they were unfolding into my awareness, becoming more real with every passing moment. I turned, or at least I think I turned, and saw him. He was unlike anything I had ever seen, yet somehow he felt familiar, like I had known him all my life. His presence was both overwhelming and comforting, powerful yet gentle. I didn't need to ask who he was. Deep down, I already knew. And then I saw him, the one I never expected to meet. The moment our eyes met, everything around me seemed to slow. Time itself felt different, as if the very fabric of existence had shifted. Except it wasn't just the world that had changed. It was everything. He stood before me. Or maybe stood isn't the right word, because he wasn't bound by space the way I had always understood it. His presence filled the air, as if he was both near and everywhere at once. His face shone with a radiance so pure, so full of love, that it was almost impossible to comprehend. And yet, for all his majesty, there was a tenderness in his expression, a familiarity that made me feel like I had known him forever. I didn't need an introduction. I didn't need to ask who he was. Every part of me recognized him, even the parts of me I hadn't known existed. This was Jesus. The realization hit me like a wave, flooding every part of my being. Fear, awe, gratitude, unworthiness. I couldn't hold myself up under the weight of it all. My knees buckled, and I found myself bowing before him. Not because I thought I should, but because I couldn't do anything else. His presence was overwhelming. And yet, it didn't crush me. It lifted me, held me, made me feel more alive than I had ever been. Then, he spoke. Matthew. The sound of my name in his voice was unlike anything I'd ever heard. It wasn't just a sound, it was a truth, a calling, a love so profound it resonated through every fiber of my being. Do not be afraid. I wanted to tell him I wasn't afraid, but that wasn't entirely true. I was afraid. Afraid of what this moment meant, afraid of why I was here. But as his words washed over me, the fear began to melt away, replaced by something else. Peace. Trust. You have questions, he said. It wasn't a question. It was an invitation, a knowing. Ask them. My voice trembled. Why am I here? I whispered. Why me? He smiled, a smile filled with infinite understanding and compassion. Because I love you, he said simply, and because you have a purpose. The purpose. The words hit me like a lightning bolt. A purpose. I had spent my whole life trying to live with purpose, to make a difference, to do something meaningful. But in the chaos of recent years, I had begun to lose sight of that. The fires, the destruction. They had left me questioning everything, and now here he was, telling me I had a purpose. But why now? I asked. Why this way? I don't understand. He placed a hand on my shoulder. His touch wasn't physical, yet I felt it in the deepest part of me. You will. His voice was gentle, full of certainty. But first, there are things you must see. As he spoke, the space around us shifted. Reality itself seemed to peel back, layer by layer, revealing something I had never known was there. Suddenly we were no longer in the ethereal light. We were looking down, at the world I had just left. The fires raged below, consuming everything in their path. But this time I saw more than just flames. I saw something deeper, something sinister. Jesus' voice was heavy with sorrow as he spoke. These fires, he said, are not merely natural disasters. They are the physical manifestation of a spiritual reality. I stared, unable to look away. Within the flames, I saw the darkness. Within the flames, shapes moved within the fire, dark, shadowy figures twisting and writhing as if they were alive. They weren't human, and yet there was something unmistakably intelligent about them. A presence, a malice that sent a chill through me, even though I had no body to feel it. They weren't just in the fire, they were feeding off it. With every acre burned, with every home lost, they grew stronger. I swallowed hard, my voice barely above a whisper. What are they? Jesus' gaze was steady, filled with both sorrow and truth. They are the fruits of spiritual corruption. The words settled over me like a heavy weight. These fires, he continued, are not just accidents of nature. They are the result of choices, decisions made in the hearts of my people over generations. They have turned away from me, choosing the ways of the world over the ways of truth. Every act of selfishness, every rejection of love, every embrace of fear and hatred has fed this darkness. A lump rose in my throat. I turned back to the flames, watching as the shadows twisted and swayed, growing bolder, hungrier. Why would you let this happen? The question burned inside me before I could stop it. But why would you allow this? I asked, my voice trembling. Why let so much pain and destruction happen? His eyes met mine, and in them I saw both deep sorrow and unwavering hope. Because I love them, I frowned. But if you love them— Love does not force itself, he interrupted gently. It does not compel. It does not coerce. It invites, it calls, it waits. His voice was filled with something deeper than sadness, something deeper than pain. The fires are a warning, Matthew, a call to return to me. Yes, they are painful, but they are also merciful. They reveal what has been hidden, bringing darkness into the light so that it can be healed. I turned back to the fire, to the shadows that writhed within it. A warning, a mercy. And yet, all I could see was destruction. What can I do? I exhaled shakily. And what am I supposed to do? I asked. I'm just one person. How can I possibly make a difference in all of this? Jesus placed a hand on my shoulder, and in that moment I felt it. Not just the weight of his presence, but the weight of his love. It was almost too much to bear. You have a voice, he said, and you have a story to tell. What you have seen here is not just for you. It is for the world. You must share it. You must tell them the truth. The truth. I felt the enormity of those words press against me. But what if they don't listen? I asked. What if they mock me, reject me? Jesus smiled. That same knowing, compassionate smile that held something vast and infinite within it. Some will, he said simply, but others will hear. And for those who do, your words will be the seed that begins to grow. He let the words sink in before continuing. It is not your job to control the outcome. It is your job to be faithful. I swallowed hard. Faithful. Why me? The doubt still lingered, curling around my thoughts like smoke. Why me? I asked again, almost pleading. I'm not special. I'm not a prophet or a preacher. I'm just a firefighter. Jesus' expression softened. That is why I chose you, he said. Because you are humble. Because you understand the value of service and sacrifice. You have been faithful with little, and now I am entrusting you with much. His gaze held mine, filled with eternity and love. And then he spoke again. Matthew, this is what you must tell them. Seeing the truth. As I stood there, transfixed by the presence of Jesus and the gravity of his words, the world around us began to shift. It wasn't chaotic or disorienting, it was purposeful, like a veil being lifted. The fires I had seen before, the ones consuming homes, landscapes, entire lives, came back into focus. But this time I saw them differently. They weren't just fires, they were alive, pulsating, twisting, breathing. A darkness lurked within them, spreading, stretching, growing, as they devoured everything in their path. And within the flames, I saw them again. The shadows, the figures, moving with purpose. They weren't just mindless forces of destruction. They were orchestrating it. Jesus' voice cut through the vision like a beam of light. These are not just wildfires, Matthew. I turned to him, my heart pounding. What do you mean? But deep down, I already knew. A reflection of a deeper reality. His eyes held both sorrow and compassion. These fires are the result of a world that has turned away from me. They are not merely accidents or natural disasters. They are manifestations of choices made over generations. I felt the truth of his words settle into my bones. Each flame you see represents more than physical destruction, he continued. It reflects spiritual apathy, disconnection, the pursuit of self over truth. As he spoke, the vision shifted again. I saw scenes of everyday life, people rushing through crowded cities, their eyes glued to their phones, families sitting in silence, each person absorbed in their own screen, churches filled with people going through the motions of faith, but missing the fire of true worship. It wasn't just apathy I saw. It was something deeper, a sense of emptiness, a slow, creeping hunger that had seeped into the bones of the world. Jesus' voice was steady. This is the spiritual landscape of the world, Matthew. The fires you fight on the ground are fueled by the fires in the hearts of my people, fires of greed, fear, anger, and pride. I felt the weight of his words pressing down on me, suffocating, inescapable. But why? I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. Why would people choose this? Why would they turn away from you? Jesus' gaze was gentle, yet firm. It is not always a conscious choice, he said. Many do not reject me outright. They simply allow other things to take my place. I looked back at the fires, at the darkness, at the world, and for the first time, I understood. The small choices that create distance. They didn't reject him outright, not at first, but over time, their priorities shifted. Comfort became more important than conviction. Entertainment replaced engagement. Self-interest overshadowed sacrifice. Small compromises, tiny steps away from truth. And before they knew it, the distance had grown so vast they could no longer see the light at all. A fire fueled by spiritual corruption. The vision shifted again. I watched the fires rage across California, devouring everything in their path. But now I saw something I hadn't noticed before, a connection between the physical and the spiritual. Each blaze was anchored to something deeper, something unseen. Darkness. In certain areas, the darkness was so thick it felt almost tangible, pulsing with a cold, oppressive energy that sent a chill through me. What can be done? I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. How do we stop this? Jesus turned to me, his expression steady, firm, yet still full of hope. Not all is lost. Points of light. His words stirred something inside me. There are still points of light, he continued, places and people who remain faithful, who live in love and truth. These lights push back the darkness, creating spaces where the fires cannot take hold. As he spoke, the vision shifted again. This time I saw them. Scattered across the state were small pockets of light, bright, unwavering, defying the chaos. In these places the fires struggled to spread. The flames were still present, but they burned less fiercely, as if something unseen held them back. I saw families praying together, communities standing united, supporting one another, people choosing to live with integrity, despite the madness around them. Jesus' voice was steady. These lights represent my people, those who have not forgotten me. Where they stand firm in faith, the forces behind the fires cannot gain a foothold. Their love, their prayers, their commitment to truth create a spiritual shield that protects not just them, but those around them. Hope surged through me, but so did the weight of reality. These points of light, they were so few compared to the vastness of the flames. Is it enough? I asked. Are there enough of them to make a difference? Jesus' expression grew urgent. That depends. The battle cannot be won by human effort alone. His voice took on a new intensity. It depends on whether my people will wake up to the truth. This is not just a physical battle, Matthew. It is a spiritual one, and it cannot be won with human effort alone. Then he turned fully toward me, his gaze locking onto mine with a force that sent a shiver down my spine. This is why you are here. The weight of his words settled over me. You must tell them what you have seen. You must help them understand that these fires cannot be stopped by firefighting techniques or government policies alone. The root of the problem is spiritual, and the solution lies in returning to me. His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. I swallowed, my throat dry. How? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. How do I tell them? How do I make them see? Speak the truth. Jesus' answer was simple. Speak the truth. I hesitated. But what if they don't listen? Some will, he said. Some won't. That is not for you to control. Your task is to be faithful, to shine a light in the darkness. The vision shifted once more, and I saw two possible futures. In one, the fires grew worse, consuming not just land but lives, communities, and hope itself. In the other, the lights began to spread. One by one they connected, forming a network of faith and love that pushed back the darkness. In this path, the fires lost their power. Their destruction weakened as the spiritual atmosphere changed. Jesus' voice cut through the vision with unmistakable urgency. Time is running out. His gaze was filled with both love and sorrow. The choice must be made soon. Tell them, Matthew. Tell them that I love them, that I am calling them back to me. But also tell them that the time for indecision is over. They must choose. Every act of faith matters. He placed a hand on my shoulder, and in that moment, the love that radiated from him was almost overwhelming. Remember this, he said. Every act of faith, every prayer, every moment of love and sacrifice creates a ripple effect in the spiritual realm. Nothing is in vain. Even the smallest light can push back the greatest darkness. As the vision began to fade, his final words echoed in my mind. The fires are a warning, but they are also an invitation, a call to return to the truth. Share this message, Matthew, and know that I am with you always. The first thing I felt was weight. After what felt like an eternity floating in peace and light, the sensation of gravity pressing against me was jarring. My chest rose and fell in a strained rhythm. Every breath felt like a monumental effort, faint beeping sounds, distant murmurs, and then awareness. I was back. The memory of where I had been and what I had seen crashed into me all at once. The light, the overwhelming love, Jesus' presence, the vision of the fires. It was all still there, burned into my soul as if I had lived it just moments ago. But now I was here, back in the physical world, and the contrast was almost too much to bear. A familiar voice broke through the haze. "Matthew?" I turned my head, my vision clearing just enough to see her, my wife, Emma, standing beside me, tears in her eyes. I had returned, but the real question was, would they listen? Waking up to a new reality. The first thing I felt was warmth, a hand clutching mine, trembling. Slowly, I forced my eyes open. Emma. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed, as if she hadn't slept in days. The moment she saw me stir, a sob escaped her lips. "Oh, thank God," she whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. I tried to speak, but my throat was raw. The only sound that came out was a hoarse rasp. Emma quickly grabbed a cup of water from the bedside table and helped me take a few small sips. The cool liquid soothed my throat, but it did nothing to calm the storm raging inside me. How could I explain what had just happened? How could I tell her that while my body lay lifeless in this hospital bed, I had been somewhere else, somewhere more real than this world itself? My kids. The door creaked open and two small faces peeked in hesitantly. Ellie and Noah. The moment I saw them, my chest tightened. Their wide, worried eyes filled with hope, searching my face for reassurance. "Daddy," Ellie whispered, her voice trembling. I swallowed hard. "I'm okay," I managed to croak, forcing a small smile. It wasn't entirely true. I wasn't okay. Not yet. But I needed to be strong for them. They didn't hesitate. Both rushed to my side, their little hands gripping mine as if afraid I might disappear again. Emma leaned down, pressing a soft kiss to my forehead. A few stray tears landed on my skin. "You scared us," she murmured, trying to smile through her emotions. She took a shaky breath before continuing. "The doctors, They said you were gone for a few minutes. They said you shouldn't even be here right now." Her words sent a shiver through me. She had no idea how right she was. By all medical accounts, I had been dead. My heart had stopped. But what she didn't know, what no one in that room could possibly know, was where I had been in those minutes. What I had seen, what I had been told. And now, here I was, alive, with a message burning inside me like a fire I couldn't extinguish. The weight of the mission. One by one, more people arrived. My fellow firefighters, my parents, even my team captain. Their relief was palpable. Their voices blurred together as they took turns checking on me, expressing gratitude that I had survived. I nodded, smiled, murmured reassurances. But my mind was elsewhere. I kept hearing his voice. "You must tell them." The weight of that command pressed against my chest, heavier than anything I had ever carried. Later that evening, when the room had finally cleared, and it was just Emma and me, she sat beside me. Her eyes searched mine. "Matthew," she said softly, "there's something different about you." She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "I can see it in your eyes. What happened while you were gone?" The moment of truth, I hesitated. My heart pounded. How could I even begin to explain? Would she believe me? Would she think I was delirious from trauma? But I couldn't keep this inside, not from her. If anyone deserved to know the truth, it was my wife. I took a deep breath, and I told her. At first my voice was shaky, my words faltering, but as I spoke, they began to flow more easily. I told her about the light, the overwhelming peace and love I had felt. I told her about Jesus, how he had appeared to me, how his presence had filled me with a sense of wholeness and purpose I had never known before. I told her about the vision, the fires, the shadows, the spiritual battle raging beneath the surface of our world. And finally, I told her about his command, that I had been sent back to share what I had seen. I expected doubt. Emma listened in silence. She never interrupted. Her eyes never left mine. I had expected doubt, maybe even disbelief. But what I saw in her face wasn't skepticism, it was understanding. When I finished, she reached for my hand and squeezed it tightly. "Matthew," she said softly, "I believe you." My breath hitched. "You do?" My voice cracked, barely more than a whisper. She nodded. "I don't know how to explain it, but I can feel it. What you're saying, it's true. I can see it in you. You're not the same man who left for work that day." Her words broke something open inside me. Tears welled up in my eyes. She believed me. That was all the confirmation I needed. Sharing the story over the next few days, as I recovered in the hospital, I began sharing my story. First, with my closest family. Then, with a few trusted friends. Each time, I felt the same fear, the same uncertainty about how they would react. But to my surprise, most of them listened. Some cried. Some asked questions. Some even admitted they too had felt an unease about the world lately, like something was shifting, like darkness was creeping closer. But not everyone was receptive. Some dismissed my story outright. "You've been through a lot, Matt," one of my co-workers said, patting my shoulder. "Don't overthink it. I'm just glad you're okay." His words stung, not because of his doubt, but because I knew deep in my soul that this was bigger than me, that this was real. Jesus' words echoed in my mind every time I felt doubt creeping in. "Tell them what you have seen. Be faithful. Leave the rest to me." Seeing the world through new eyes. By the time I was discharged from the hospital, I felt stronger, not just physically, spiritually. The world outside felt different, like I was seeing it through new eyes. The shadows seemed darker, but the light was still there. And I knew, without a doubt, that I had been sent back for a reason. The question now was, Would people listen? Would they choose to see before it was too late? A mission that changed everything. Every moment felt significant now. Every interaction, every opportunity to share the message I had been given. It all carried weight. As I stepped out of the hospital and into the warmth of the sun, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. My life would never be the same. I had been given a mission, and no matter the cost, I was determined to fulfill it. I knew sharing this message wouldn't be easy. What I didn't realize was how profoundly it would change not just me, but everyone I loved. The weight of the truth. It has been months since I woke up in that hospital bed, gasping for air, clinging to life after what can only be described as a miracle. At first, the thought of sharing my experience felt impossible. How do you put into words something so profound, so beyond anything this world understands? How do you tell people that the flames consuming their homes and communities are more than just natural disasters, that they are symptoms of a deeper spiritual battle? And yet, I had no choice. Jesus' words were clear. Tell them what you have seen. So I started small. First, I shared with those closest to me. Emma, my kids, a few trusted friends. To my surprise, many of them didn't dismiss my story. Some wept as I described the overwhelming love I felt in Jesus' presence. Others admitted they too had sensed a growing spiritual emptiness, a quiet disconnection they couldn't quite explain. Those early conversations were raw, difficult, and deeply personal, but they were also transformative. The message spread's word traveled quickly in our small community. Before I knew it, I was being invited to speak at churches, community centers, even schools. Every time I stood before a crowd, I felt a mix of nerves and conviction. I told them about the light, the vision of the fires, the shadowy entities that fed off our apathy and disconnection, and the points of light, the moments of love, faith, and courage that pushed back against the darkness. But most importantly, I shared this truth. The fires are a warning, but they are also an invitation. We are being called back to faith, to love, to truth, skeptics and believers. Not everyone believed me. Some were skeptical. Others outright mocked what I had to say. "Matthew, you've been through a traumatic experience," they would say. "Your mind is just trying to make sense of it all." I never argued. I couldn't force anyone to believe me. But I kept speaking, kept sharing, kept trusting that the truth would resonate with those ready to hear it. And it did. Slowly but surely, I began to see the ripple effects of the message. Faith in action families who hadn't prayed together in years began setting aside time to connect with each other and with God. Churches that had become more about programs than purpose reopened their doors for extended hours of worship and prayer. People who had once been consumed by fear, anger, or selfishness began reaching out, offering help, encouragement, and kindness to their neighbors. It wasn't about religion. It was about faith in action, about living with intention and love. And the most incredible part? As people embraced faith, kindness, and community, something shifted. The heavy, oppressive darkness that had loomed over so many places began to lift. Hope took root. Even the physical fires, though still devastating, seemed less overwhelming in these areas, as if the spiritual light was pushing back against the destruction. A life forever changed. My own life changed in ways I never could have imagined. Sharing this message brought me closer to my family, my friends, my community. But more importantly, it deepened my relationship with God. The doubts and fears that had once plagued me were replaced by a peace and purpose I had never known before. I didn't have all the answers, and I didn't need them. I was walking the path I was meant to walk, and that was enough. The weight of the mission. That doesn't mean it's always easy. There are still days when the weight of this mission feels like too much. Days when I wonder if I'm doing enough, if I'm making a difference. But in those moments, I remember Jesus' words, "Be faithful, leave the rest to me." I'm not responsible for changing hearts. That's God's work. My job is simply to share the truth and trust that it will reach those who need it. Hope is always there. As I sit here reflecting on everything that has happened, I'm overwhelmed with gratitude for the second chance I've been given, for the love and support of those around me, for the opportunity to share this message with you. I know the world can feel dark, overwhelming, especially in times of disaster and uncertainty. But I also know this: there is always hope, always. No matter how dark things may seem, there is light, and it starts with us. Be the light. The time to choose is now. We all have the power to be a point of light in the darkness, to push back against fear and apathy with love and faith. And it doesn't take grand gestures or perfect lives. It starts with small choices. A prayer, a kind word, a moment of selflessness. Those choices ripple outward, creating change in ways we may never fully see or understand. So I'm asking you, no, I'm urging you, to reflect on your own life. Where is your light? What can you do today to shine brighter? To bring hope and love to those around you? Because as long as there is breath in your lungs and love in your heart, there is time to make a difference. Share the message. Thank you for listening to my story. It hasn't been easy to share, but I know, deep in my soul, that this is what I was called to do. If this message resonated with you, I ask one simple thing. Share it. Share it with your family, your friends, your community. Let it spark conversations, inspire action, bring people together. And if you found this meaningful, please like, subscribe, and share. Together, we can spread this message of hope and faith to those who need it most. God bless you. And remember, no matter how dark things may seem, there is always light. Be the light.